Hello, I'm Kwangu Liwewe and welcome to this edition of Africa 360. It's been 15 years since the formation of the Movement for Democratic Change came into existence in Zimbabwe. Last year, the party suffered a humiliating defeat at the hands of President Robert Mugabe's ZANU-PF. Now, some would argue that after more than 3 decades at the helm, ZANU-PF and indeed the president are unbeatable. Yet when we look a little bit closer, we find an opposition that is fractured, beset with infighting, and appears to be adrift in the very rough seas of Zimbabwe's politics. In this David versus Goliath fight for control of Zimbabwe, the opposition appears puny and barely able to launch a credible attack.
By the mid-1990s, it was clear that Zimbabwe's economic structural adjustment had failed. Soaring unemployment and inflation devastated the country once known as Africa's breadbasket. Fed up, Zimbabweans stood up against their liberation leaders. But Robert Mugabe's increasingly autocratic government cracked down on civic organizations and trade unions. Defiant, by 1999, student bodies, civic groups and trade unionists came together to launch what would later become the Movement for Democratic Change. Going up against ZANU-PF was a mammoth task for the fledgling MDC. However, the group made early gains. It successfully opposed the 2000 referendum that would have given ZANU-PF politicians immunity from legal prosecution, and shocked Mugabe when it won 47% of the vote in the 2000 election. The old liberation movement retaliated violently. Security forces, war veterans and youth militia targeted the MDC and its supporters. The MDC responded by refusing to participate in what it called an inherently fraudulent 2004 election. The party only participated after SADC intervened. They were still able to win 40% of the vote. Despite a strong showing internally, the MDC was cracking. They struggled financially and were unable to define a winning strategy against Mugabe and the ZANU-PF. First Welshman Ngube's faction, the MDCN, broke away in 2005 when the party couldn't agree on whether to participate in the Senate elections. That group further split in 2010 into an even smaller breakaway party, the MDC 99. Tsvangirai's MDC-T was the strongest faction contesting in the 2008 election.
I, Morgan Richard Tsvangirai.
The MDC-T won a disputed majority and survived yet another crackdown by ZANU-PF to form the government of national unity. But the MDC still could not withstand its internal turmoil. And after the 2013 election, the party split yet again.
So can the MDC survive its own internal turmoil? Well, joining me to discuss Zimbabwe's official opposition is Gideon Chitanga from the Center of the Study for Democracy at the University of Johannesburg. Gideon, thank you so much for joining us on this show. Now, the MDC, we know, was formed by different groups in Zimbabwe, such as the Student Union, trade unions and other organizations. Because of this mixture of different groups, do you think it was setting or heading rather for a splinter, the way we've seen it splinter now?
So one end is a formal opposition political party, eventually in parliament to contest ZANU-PF, and the other end looking at its role as a party that was meant to remove the dictatorship of Robert Mugabe. I think given the different actors in the party or social formations, social groupings in the party, and this long run of 15 years, a lot of sections of the population or the social base that constituted the MDC has changed on one end. On the other end, people just get tired when the struggle gets too long.
Now, earlier on, you did mention that the MDC was set on removing Mugabe, but as a party, do they have their own ideology or are they just anti-Mugabe and anti-ZANU-PF?
If you look at the problems in the MDC, they are not necessarily at the level of its main support base who are the ordinary membership. They always feature at the level of the elite leaders. This, to me, comes out of a composition and a characterization of a party that was predominantly young and its office bearers being young. And you get a lot of competition, ideas, ambitions.
So is it a power struggle within the MDC?
It is exactly a failure of managing individual interests together with institutional interests. That's how I would put it.
Now, in terms of last year's election, we did see that, of course, ZANU-PF and Robert Mugabe won that election. Do you think Morgan Tsvangirai cost his party that election?
The competition between the president of the MDC, Morgan Tsvangirai, the internal competition for power, Morgan Tsvangirai on one end, a grouping of leaders around him, the former Secretary General, Tendai Biti on one end, and a section of the Secretariat and some leaders who surrounded him. That problem should be traced way back before the 2008 elections. And that fight caused problems, a lot of problems about the cohesion of the party. Going to the elections and after, we've all heard about issues of how badly the party was financed or failed to finance some of its programs, how the two centers of power failed to coordinate, how the party failed to come up with a clear strategy coming out of the government of national unity to contest the government. And given that context, you must look at what ZANU-PF did in terms of taking the time of the inclusive government to reorganize, to remobilize its people, to make sure that the party at the leadership level was cohesive and had a strategy to retain power.
Now, is there any chance MDC can actually bounce back to the glorious days it had once upon a time when they had a lot of following?
The political context is totally different. Labour has been wiped out. Students are no longer as organized as they were. The civil society is dead. It's just individual speaking from different platforms and ideas. And in 2005, when they survived the first split, they were carried on the back of the National Constitutional Assembly, which is no longer as big and as powerful as it was then, and now it's a new political formation which is competing against the MDC. So the challenges are immense. But is there any chance of surviving? This is the question Tsvangirai should carry into his Congress and beyond. If he fails to demonstrate that he's a dynamic leader, perhaps he will sink with the MDC as much as Mugabe will sink with ZANU-PF.
So, is the leadership the weakest link in Zimbabwe's opposition, or are the obstacles stacked against them insurmountable? After the break, we talk to Morgan Tsvangirai, Zimbabwe's most prominent opposition leader. Do stay with us.
A very sad development. But you know, for us it's not a split. It's just people deciding to leave the party.
Welcome back. I'm Kwangu Liwewe and this is Africa 360. The last 15 years have certainly been politically turbulent in Zimbabwe. The official opposition movement, the Movement for Democratic Change, has been central in challenging the ruling ZANU-PF's authority. Once the face of the opposition, analysts now question the political future of Zimbabwe's former Prime Minister. Here's a reminder of just who Morgan Tsvangirai is and the promises he's made to the Zimbabwean people.
The eldest of 9 children with little more than a high school education, Morgan Tsvangirai did not take the road to leadership typically followed by Zimbabwe's political elite. The former mine worker rose through the ranks of the Zimbabwe Congress of Trade Unions. Once a firm supporter of President Robert Mugabe, he became a vocal critic.
We must give Mugabe a resounding defeat.
He was ultimately elected head of the newly formed MDC in 1999. Following the MDC's good showing in the 2000 elections, Tsvangirai was now firmly in the sights of Mugabe's thugs. In 2002, his plight rose to international prominence after he was severely beaten by Zimbabwean police. He lived under fear of the death penalty after it was alleged that he plotted to assassinate President Robert Mugabe. However, under intense international pressure, Tsvangirai remained a free man. But Mugabe used every opportunity to vilify the man and his movement.
Tsvangirai misoro, big-headed. But you would think that that big head carries some sanity within it. None.
Despite the attacks, the MDC still contested the 2008 election. Tsvangirai seemed close to victory, but he did not have enough of the votes for an outright win. The run-up to the second round runoff elections saw his supporters attacked and killed, and Tsvangirai pulled out of the race. The international community and South Africa in particular brokered a deal that saw the formation of the Government of National Unity. The old enemy shared power with Mugabe as president and Tsvangirai as prime minister. But it seemed Tsvangirai was distracted by this power. He was dogged by personal issues that included accusations of a love triangle, a paternity suit, and the death of his wife in 2009. By the 2013 election, Tsvangirai was unable to secure what should have been an easy win.
I want President Mugabe to enjoy his retirement in peace and comfort of his homeland. Our conclusion has been that this is...
Tsvangirai cried foul.
The credibility of this election has been marred by administrative and legal violations which affect the legitimacy of its outcome.
But it was too little, too late.
These proposed changes...
Mugabe refused to give any quarter to his foe, and the MDC was excluded from government. Determined to rebuild his popularity and challenge what he calls a stolen government, Tsvangirai and the MDC have had to contend with a myriad of internal struggles.
Given his current situation, it's questionable if Morgan Tsvangirai will be able to deliver on the many promises that he's made to his supporters. Zimbabwe's current political climate is not in his favor. I spoke to the former Prime Minister a short while ago, and this is what he had to say. Thank you, Mr. Tsvangirai, for speaking to Africa 360. It's been a year now since the election last year, and we saw during your campaign period thousands of MDC supporters rallying behind you. Now, how have you dealt with their disappointment that that election was lost?
Well, it's not their fault. Yes, they were disappointed. Like all of us, we were very disappointed by the outcome. But who would have planned for a stolen election?
Now, you've spoken extensively about the stolen election. It's 1 year on now. Isn't it time for MDC to move on and come up with another plan?
We can't forget 2013 elections because there were no contestations. You cannot forget what has happened because it will have an impact of what is going to happen. So for us, we can't talk of 2018 because that sort of legitimizes 2013 election, which was stolen. So as far as we are concerned, that issue of illegitimacy has to be resolved.
And how will that be resolved?
It can only be resolved by another election.
Before 2018?
Before 2018.
So what steps are you taking to lead to this process of having an election
well,
for 2018?
We have got our plans, we have got our strategies. We will get the election before 2018.
Could you elaborate a bit more on this?
No, I won't elaborate on it. The only thing is that there is no way the country's state of affairs will be sustained in the current state of affairs.
What would allow for an election before 2018? What circumstances would allow for that?
What we will have to look at is what pressure has to bear to say the current crisis cannot be sustained. And the only way for a national solution is to have another election which is going to be free and fair.
Now, we've heard about the breakaway MDC, they're calling MDC Renewal team, and we know that it's being led by your former close ally, Tendai Biti. What is your relationship like with him currently?
There's no relationship. They have decided to leave the party and form their own. It's their democratic right. Sad as it may appear, but that's what they have decided. A very sad development. But you know, for us it's not a split. It's just people deciding to leave the party. Just like in the ANC, you have COP, you have EFF. People leave parties when they feel disappointed, when they feel discomfortable in a particular political situation. I have not talked to Tendai ever since that. They have pursued their own agenda. Wish them luck.
Now, in terms of your elective Congress, is that still happening in October? And what steps have you taken towards?
We have brought forward our Congress. to deal with a number of issues. One is deal with this leadership wrangle, if you can call it that way, but also to define a future for the party in terms of the roadmap, in terms of policies, in terms of programs of the party. We are talking this Congress as a Congress that is going to reinvigorate the party to move forward, to face the new challenges.
Now, you talk about the leadership crisis as one of the things that will be discussed at the Congress. Yeah. Now, if we will not see the MDC Renewal team there, who will you be discussing this? Where is the issue? I thought the issue is with them.
No, the issue is not with them. They have decided to embark on an unconstitutional act. They have decided to form their own party with different colors, with a different identity. They are a new party, but without a name. So they are no longer part of the structures of the MDC. In fact, as I speak, they have just recently appointed their small executive. So they are already in the process of forming their own party. So the Congress will not deal with that issue.
Are you going to still stand to be leader of the party?
In the MDC, you don't express an opinion. You are nominated by provinces, right? The provinces will nominate you whether they want you to lead or not. I'm also expecting to be nominated. And if I'm nominated, I will contest. But no party post is sacrosanct. Every party post is up for contestation. And if people nominate another person, it will be a contest at the Congress.
MDC is split into two factions right now. Does the country have a credible and functioning opposition at this stage?
We have not factionalized. I've told you, we have got people who have left the party. That's not factionalism. As for the national dialogue, it's a different agenda. Are we able to even begin to talk about a sustainable national dialogue that is going to find a solution in the face of ZANU-PF intransigence? That's the question we have to confront. If we go and form another GNU, what it means is that you're just sustaining ZANU-PF. ZANU-PF has pushed that country to the brink, and in the last GNU, we were saying, let's save the people. Now, is it only incumbent upon the MDC to always feel about the people and ZANU-PF totally disregarding the feelings of the people? That is the question that should come in that national dialogue.
And when you look back at the GNU, was it worth it going into it?
I think on hindsight, it was important to have a GNU. We resolved a number of issues. I know Mugabe was talking about it was horror. It was not horror. In fact, for the first time, we started to see things stabilized. The economy stabilized, the education sector, the social sectors restored, people planning about their future in a more effective way. But what has now happened as far as that GNU is concerned is that we actually saved Mugabe and ZANU-PF, which on that you can criticize us. But on resolving the issues that the people were facing, I think the MDC performed quite well.
Thank you very much, sir.
You're welcome.
So what about Morgan Tsvangirai's former ally turned enemy, Tendai Biti? With yet another split in the opposition party, is he the man to back? Stay tuned to find out more.
And for 34 years, Zimbabwe has been going in reverse.
Welcome back. You're watching Africa 360 and I'm your host, Kwangu Liwewe. On today's show, we're taking a look at Zimbabwe's opposition movement. The movement for democratic change has seen no less than 4 splits. Can the party and its supporters survive? Former Secretary General Tendai Biti believes the party needs a shot in the arm.
Yet another humiliation. Morgan Tsvangirai's party attempted to unseat him in April this year. Led by Party Secretary General Tendai Biti, the group accused Tsvangirai and his allies of violating the party's constitution and making unilateral decisions that damage the MDC. Most damning, they blame him for the party's defeat at the 2013 polls. Tsvangirai was able to rally support and his party stood by him. But yet another faction of the MDC walked away. Dubbed the Renewal Team, the new group has pledged to return to the founding values of the MDC. Once close allies, Biti sees no chance of reuniting with Tsvangirai.
Well, here to paint the picture of a rejuvenated movement for democratic change is the former Secretary General of the MDCT and the leader of the latest renewal movement, Tendai Biti. Mr. Biti, thank you very much for joining us. Now, just tell us, what exactly will the MDC Renewal bring to the voters and why should they trust you?
Well, we have got a crisis in Zimbabwe. We've got a crisis of a failed liberation movement in the form of ZANU-PF, led by President Mugabe. That has failed and failed completely. But the post-liberation movement itself, which we were part of, because of the delayed transition, also developed contradictions of its own, which inevitably meant that a new narrative, a new discourse, a new paradigm had to be adopted in Zimbabwe. Hence the inevitability of the renewal movement led by Dr. Samuel Ngoma.
Clearly, Zimbabwe's opposition is young and fragmented. Why did you decide to break away from MDCT and form this one? Won't this just further weaken the opposition in the country?
One of the things that the renewal movement is actually pushing is for the reunification or the formation of a grand coalition against ZANU-PF. So it's a part of the formation of this new narrative that the renewal team is spearheading. Only a mad person does the same thing over and over again. And in Zimbabwe, in our opposition trenches, we've been doing the same thing over and over again for the last 15 years, and we've come up without any tangible result.
So would you blame the president of MDCT, Morgan Tsvangirai, for your loss in last year's election?
I think that the election was definitely rigged, but the MDC must also take responsibility by participating in an election where reforms had not taken place against the advice of the region and against internal advice from our experts.
Now, your party's had a turbulent 15 years in opposition. How confident can people be that this time you're going to get it right?
There are two things. First, there has to be change in Zimbabwe. There has to be change in Africa. To change means that the revolution becomes hijacked. And in the case of ZANU-PF, the revolution has been hijacked. There are serious contradictions in ZANU-PF. ZANU-PF has failed. And for 34 years, Zimbabwe has been going in reverse. That means that you need a strong opposition. But that strong opposition must be able to articulate pro-poor policies beyond a slogan that says ZANU-PF must go, the ruling party must go. And if you don't do that, in other words, the movement pushing for change must also recognize that it itself internally must change. Its message itself must change. And when that doesn't happen, there will be no difference between the liberation movement and the post-liberation movement. Contradictions, okay? And this is exactly what happened in the MDC.
Now, Mr. Biti, some people have dubbed you as the heir apparent to Morgan Tsvangirai. But when it seems as if he wasn't going to move, it looked like you forced him out for your own political ambitions. How do you respond to this?
On the contrary, I'm not in this struggle for personal ambition, which is why I'm not even the leader of the renewal team. As I've already said, we are led by Dr. Samuel Ngoma, a veteran nationalist. And that tells you that I'm not there to seek personal ambition. I've sacrificed throughout my life. I've been beaten up, I've been tortured, I've been imprisoned, and I'm here. I'm a professional, but I've sacrificed to be part of the struggle to remove dictatorship in my country. And unless and until dictatorship is removed, you'll find me in the trenches together with like-minded people like myself.
But Mr. Biti, the two of you seemed really close at what time? What's your relationship like now?
Well, I think that Tsvangirai must be respected for leading the democratic movement. But democracy is not a slogan. It is not a jacket that you put on and off. It must be lived. You must have genuine alchemy and chemistry with democracy. You yourself must be democratic. You yourself must be personally accountable. And you can't insist on democracy on the part of ZANU-PF and not live itself. If you don't do that, then contradictions develop. And that is exactly what has happened in the MDC. The whole issues which we're fighting against ZANU-PF, personalization, privatization, leaders who stay too long in offices, we saw then some contradictions in the MDC. And naturally when that happens, Fisher's I regard him as my father. He's old enough to be my father. I regard him as my father. I respect him. And I can go for dinner anytime with him.
Just how many more splits can Zimbabwe's opposition survive? Or is there need for entirely new political opposition? And who would this be? Tell us what you think via our Facebook page or tweet us at Africa360_ENCA. You can also send us an email at africa360@enca.com. If you'd like to watch this or previous episodes, go online to www.enca.com/Africa360. And on that note, we come to the end of this week's show. Thanks for watching and do take care.